This is Darwin's Tree of Life by Michael Bright and Margaux Carpentier. Geological time chart. Scientists divide up the 4.6 billion years of Earth's history into smaller chunks of time. Each era, period, or epoch usually starts and ends with a dramatic geological event. The Cretaceous period, for example, ended when an asteroid plowed into the Earth, killing off the dinosaurs, and following that catastrophe, the following Paleocene epoch began. In geology, eon, era, period, and epoch are names given to the major subdivisions of time. The largest units of time are eons. They can be thousands of millions of years long. Eons are divided into eras, which are slightly shorter, and they, in turn, are divided into periods and then epochs. We are currently in the Holocene epoch. I have to apologize for my pronunciation of some of these words in advance. Contents. The Tree of Life. Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882, traveled the world studying plants and animals. While in the Galapagos Islands, he collected birds called finches. The ornithologist John Gould, 1804 to 1881, noticed that on each island the birds had differently shaped bills. Had they evolved bills that were best suited to the food available locally? Observations like this led Darwin to propose his theory of evolution. He suggested that every species has evolved from earlier life forms. The first ones appeared billions of years ago, and they evolved gradually into millions of species living on Earth today. Life changes. Evolution happens because baby plants and animals inherit most of their parents' features, but a few things might change. The changes might make the baby more likely to survive and pass that advantage on to its own young. Those without the difference might die out. Scientists call it natural selection or survival of the fittest. Darwin's Tree of Life. Darwin wrote a book called The Origin of Species in 1859, in which he compared the classification of living things to the branches of a tree. It shows the order in which plants and animals evolved, with the earliest living things on the lower branches. Branches close together show related groups. Where one group evolves into another, the branch divides. Meet the family. The Tree of Life is about relationships. You are closely related to your parents, and all the people in your family are related to grandparents and then great-grandparents, and so on, back in time. Plants and animals are the same. However, if we trace our ancestors back to the very beginning, we find that our first ancestor was the same ancestor of every plant and animal on the planet. We all evolved from the same living thing billions of years ago. The dawn of life. Life may have begun when a bolt of lightning zapped chemicals in a shallow pond or in a hot water vents deep in the sea. Nobody knows for sure, but the first living things were simple cells, which were different from non-living things because they could make copies of themselves. Ancient things. The first living things evolved about 4 billion years ago. They were similar to single-cell archaea, the most ancient group of organisms on Earth today. Some live in extreme habitats. One unusual species forms flat sheets of square-shaped cells in saltwater lakes, changing the early Earth's atmosphere. Bacteria are similar to archaea, single cells without a nucleus. Some can make their own food using water, carbon dioxide, and energy from the sun. This process is called photosynthesis, and oxygen is a waste product. It is thought that bacteria like this produced the first oxygen in Earth's atmosphere about 3.5 billion years ago. Creatures that are not plants, animals, or fungi. Protists are unrelated living things. Many consist of a single cell with a nucleus. The animal-like amoeba, the paramecium, and the fungus-like slime molds are very different, but they are grouped together as protists because nobody is sure how to classify them. The world's largest living thing. The first fungi lived about 2.4 billion years ago deep beneath the ocean floor. Today, fungi come in all shapes and sizes, from single-cell yeast to the largest living thing on Earth, a honey fungus whose filaments cover an area of 3.8 kilometers across. Fungi are more closely related to animals than plants and cannot produce their own food. The birth of animals. About 700 million years ago, almost the entire planet froze over, a period known as Snowball Earth. When the big thaw arrived, rock ground up by the glaciers was washed into the sea. This natural fertilizer increased algae in the oceans, which became food for the first animals. These animals were made of many cells. Some were probably flat and shapeless, like the modern millimeter-long trichoplax. Early land plants. Scientists believe that green plants evolved from green algae. The algae lived in water, but some survived in damp places on land. Over millions of years, these algae gradually evolved into small, green plants. By about 450 million years ago, many new species had appeared and spread across the world. Liver-like small plants. Liverworts were among the first land plants. Fossils have been found dated 473 million years old. Modern liverworts are anchored to the soil by root-like hairs rather than proper roots, and are spread either by scattering spores or with little buds of tissue, scattered by raindrops. Living cushions. Mosses joined the liverworts as pioneers on land, and together they changed the Earth's climate. The atmosphere had contained high levels of carbon dioxide, which acted like glass in a greenhouse and kept the Earth warm. When the first plants appeared, they removed CO2 during photosynthesis, and the Earth's atmosphere cooled. Ancient swamp forests. About 350 million years ago, horsetails grew to 30 meters tall and formed the swamp forests of the Carboniferous period, together with other tree-like plants. Their remains turned into coal. Nowadays, most horsetails are only a couple of meters tall. Green fronds. Most of the ferns we know today appeared during the Cretaceous period. They were tough. After the asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, the ferns survived. They covered most of the Earth's land surface for the next 100,000 years. Seed producers. By the beginning of the Carboniferous period, about 360 million years ago, land plants were developing roots, leaves, wood, pollen, and seeds. The ancestors of cycad and conifer trees grew tall during the drier Permian period that followed, replacing the swamp forests. However, it was not until the early Cretaceous period, about 140 million years ago, that the first flowers bloomed. Evergreen forests. Conifers, along with the cycads, were food for plant-eating dinosaurs. These trees produce cones, like the pine cone, to protect and help spread their seeds. Today, the world's tallest trees are conifers. Coast redwoods grow up to 115 meters tall. Beetle benefits. Ancient palm-like trees called cycads were widespread by the mid-Permian period. Over millions of years, they have developed close relationships with other living things to help them survive. Each type of modern cycad, for example, is pollinated by its own species of beetle. Early blooms. Water lilies were among the earliest flowering plants. The flowers of some species of water lilies attract insects, and scientists believe the evolution of flowering plants and insects is intertwined. Flowering plants rely on insects for pollination, and insects rely on flowers for food. Food for the world. Grasses appeared during the Cretaceous period, and their remains have been found in fossilized dinosaur dung. Today, they are the most widespread group of plants, covering nearly half of the Earth's land surface. About 3/4 of all the crops we grow are grasses. And that is the end of the first section of Darwin's Tree of Life.